media, you have to understand every time you click on something, whether it's a like or a shop now button, you are telling the algorithms who you are. If you're reading something, online or print or whatever that says, you won't believe what, la da 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 da, it's like you should probably like approach with skepticism, right? With
Believe
some
what they're
critical
telling
thinking.
you.
Exactly. It's like you won't believe what this person said, or you won't believe what happened.
Guys, I'm super excited to introduce you to Chuck Salter. Chuck is the president and CEO of News Literacy Project, an organization that's on a mission to create better informed, more engaged, and more empowered individuals, and ultimately a stronger democracy. I met Chuck through a Ripple, through a recent guest, Lorenzo Munoz, who suggested that Chuck and I get together for an interview because right now, let's face it, we are in difficult times. There are so many ways that we can consume information and get our news, from social media to television, journalism, and of course, over the radio waves. And it's hard to figure out what's true, what's false, and where we can get the correct information. The News Literacy Project really has my interest piqued because of their mission to help you figure out how to start thinking for yourself, to start asking second level questions, to not just take what you're being told as fact, but really do your homework to understand that you know what's going on. Let's face it, in today's world, with the election and all of the crises around the world, there is opportunity for a lot of narratives to be put out there and to become fact when we share it on social media and when we are in conversation with other people. And it's a very tenuous time. And there is a lot of misinformation that's out there, and it's being propagated as news when it's really just geared around entertainment. And it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you fall on, this is an important aspect of our lives that we are faced with: how to hear what's going on out there in the world and start making some decisions for ourselves, to do our own homework, and to not just take what we're being told as absolute truth. Because right now it's hard to figure out where that is. And so I'm grateful for Chuck to come by today and spend some time with us on the Ripple Effect podcast to explain what they're doing, the tools that we have accessible through their organization, and actually what they're doing to educate our young people to make sure that they are coming up as good, inquisitive, question seekers, and figure out how to utilize what they have at their fingertips to do the research and understand what's true and what's not. And so I can't tell you how excited I am to have Chuck join us today. So let's dive right in. Guys, I'm super excited to have Chuck Salter join us today for the Ripple Effect podcast. Chuck, welcome to the Ripple Effect podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Steve. Thank you for having me.
I am grateful that you are here. I am super excited. I have to start off by complimenting your team. You and I, this is the first time you and I have connected, but I've actually been visiting with Christina and Mark from your team, and they have just been amazing to prep me for this interview, to give me some detail and background about what the organization does. And I just have to say, they are a really good representation for your organization. So well done.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. They are great. They are great.
They are great. Yeah, well, I always like to start these interviews off before we dive in and learn a little bit more about News Literacy Project. I'd love to know a little bit more about Chuck. I'd love to hear a little bit of your origin story, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. So I'm the son. You want me to go way back, or just professionally?
You,
I can go
you can
back
go
as
back
far
as
as you
far as
want.
you want. Yeah.
Sure. Well, I can tell you it is relevant. I'm the son of a now retired military officer, and had the privilege of growing up all over the world and all over the country. And, as I got older, I started to realize that, my parents weren't very loud about anything. But what they instilled in me and my brothers was a sense of service. So whatever you're doing, whether it's your career or you do it in your, private time. And so from a pretty early age, I knew I wanted to do something that was in service to other people. And so I graduated from college and was accepted into Teach for America, which at the time was about um, 30 years ago. That makes me sad. Um, and it was before Teach for America is sort of the juggernaut that it is now. But really, I was assigned to teach in East Palo Alto, California, which was right across the highway from Stanford
Yeah.
and Palo Alto, and about a million miles away in terms of community. And those were the 3 years that really defined my life. Seeing a different part of the country, a different way to live, the opportunities that were denied people. And I knew I didn't want to be a teacher forever, but I knew that my path would be in education forever. So I went to law school, worked for Teach for America. After that, I opened their office in Nevada, in Las Vegas. That's still there. And then I worked for several other national nonprofits, all education related, before coming to the News Literacy Project 6 years ago. And
Okay.
I was the first ever chief operating officer of the organization. And 2 years ago, had the privilege of succeeding our founding CEO, Alan Miller.
Well, so 6 years ago, you come into News Literacy Project, and you guys reference it as NLP, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you come into the organization as the COO, and that was a new role. What surprised you in making the switch from the various nonprofits and educational opportunities that you had explored previously, coming into this organization? What surprised you the most about it?
There were two things that I experienced right away. Number one was I had never really worked for a startup. And I use that term loosely because NLP was about 10 years old when I started. But it was in our current iteration where we're virtual and we leverage technology to teach students and to help educators teach their students. That iteration of NLP was only a few years old. So we were really at the beginning of doing what we do now. And that was an entirely new experience for me because I had worked for organizations that had existed, for decades or more, and were much larger. And it was much more hands-on kind of experience. The other thing that was, I think, the most interesting for me was up until that point, my career had focused on, nobly focused on, I should say, really improving the educational outcomes of underrepresented and disadvantaged communities, under-resourced communities, because our education system, as brilliant as it is at times, still consistently fails certain subsets of our population. And so that was the focus of my work. But coming to NLP, while we certainly work with those communities as well, we're addressing a problem that affects everyone.
Yep.
Everyone is susceptible to disinformation. Everyone can be misled to make bad choices about their lives, about their democratic participation, a whole host of issues. And so, while I was more hands-on and a smaller kind of grassrootsy startup kind of mode, uh, the mission of the organization was and continues to be much, much bigger and much, much broader than I had worked on in the past, which is very rewarding. Both of those aspects turned out to be quite rewarding.
Oh, that's great. What give my audience just a little sense of what NLP does day to day and sort of where you see it going in the future. Obviously, there's a great need for this. You and I, and I should back up actually before I have you go into that. You and I met through a mutual friend, Lorenza Munoz, who was on my
That's right.
podcast a few months back, and she and I just hit it off. But one of the things that we really talked about was the fact that there, with all of the information and resources that are out there, there is a lot of challenges, and a lot of challenges for us as adults, and certainly a lot of challenges for young people to understand where to get the truth. And the media and all the various platforms that are out there, social media and different resources or sources for information, it's hard to sort of cull through that. And so when she and I hit it off and we really had this great conversation about this process and why it's such a challenge in her time at the LA Times as a reporter and how different that job has been just in the time that she's left, it was super fascinating to me because it is such an important thing that not a lot of people are talking about. So the work that you do when she connected us just really resonated with me. I mean, I felt like I wanted to really, and hopefully we can through this podcast, just sing your praises from the rooftops because everybody needs to know what you guys are doing. So share with us what you are doing.
Certainly. So I appreciate the opportunity to do it. To what you just said, to talk a little bit about dis and misinformation and what's happening right now. So, I'm often asked by folks who want to support our work or who are just, curious about our work. The first question I get asked often is, what is NLP doing to end disinformation? And I always have to politely remind folks that that's the wrong question. Disinformation, has existed as long as humans have communicated.
Sure.
It's just something we do. The difference nowadays is the amount of information is at a volume unprecedented in human history. We often say we live in the most complex information landscape in human history. And it's been shown, that the human brain isn't really wired to receive this much information in this many different forms all at once.
Yeah.
And so what we try to do is essentially help people discern fact from fiction and quality news, standards based news from non standards based news. And our ultimate goal as an organization is to solve this problem at a systemic level. So when you read our vision statement as an organization, what it basically alludes to is we want to see every student in the United States graduate high school skilled in news literacy. We think it's a fundamental life skill for the 21st century. We think it's actually it's a fundamental skill in any civics program. And we tell school districts and schools now that one of the fundamental mandates of public education was to prepare learners to participate as well-informed, highly engaged citizens in this democratic process. And when they don't teach their students civics and news literacy, they're failing that mandate.
Yeah.
And it's something that we need to change. So as an organization, a lot of nonprofits will tout how many students or, they reach or how many educators are using their products. We do that too. And it is a metric that we use. And I'm happy to, talk about that. But what we're ultimately after is changing the way students are educated in this country. I often tell my team that, all power and honor to nonprofits who are providing relief to people, instant relief, providing services, food, medical care. Those are desperately needed. I wish they weren't, but they're desperately needed. But I said there's something special about working for a nonprofit that is actually trying to put itself out of business to solve a problem that exists, a systemic issue. And so we're really going after those systemic pieces, the attitudes around teaching news literacy, the practice of teaching news literacy, but also, quite frankly, the legal mandates to teach news literacy. A lot of people don't stop and think about this, but what students are taught in school is actually a product of state legislation. Most states are fairly similar to one another, but there are differences. And so if it's not required in a state to be taught, it's very unlikely to be taught because schools are asked to do way too much already with their students. And so, changing attitudes, changing practice, but quite frankly, changing the legal and legislative structure that schools are operating in to make this a required subject, as important as any math, science, language arts class that they take, is ultimately our goal. Because when we feel that other countries do it, we get pushed back to say, well, those countries are smaller or they're more homogeneous. But I said it doesn't matter because we don't have an education system in the United States. We have 50. The states
Yeah.
handle the
That's a
education, right?
great point.
And if we take this at the state level, one state at a time, we can do exactly what those smaller countries have been doing, which is preparing their students, preparing their future citizens to not only be inoculated from harmful disinformation, but to be really well informed and engaged participants in their democracy. And so we can do it. And quite frankly, Steve, we have to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's about that's philosophically what our work is about. What we do on a technical level is we provide resources and professional development for educators to integrate news literacy into their classrooms. We do not directly teach students. We believe in the power of an educator. We believe, we trust in their professionalism and their ability to teach this and to teach it well. We also learned that it's economies of scale, that we could try to reach a number of students, but if we can help one educator, we can reach, on the secondary level, 150 students a year, maybe even more, because they teach multiple classes throughout the year. And that's the way to truly achieve national scale. But beyond working with individual educators, we form partnerships with school districts. And we work at the state level with departments of education as well to help facilitate the expansion of teaching news literacy.
So I'm curious because you guys don't work with students directly, but you're working with the educators that are working with those students. How do you help guide those teachers to overcome their own personal biases to really be able to focus on, you know, what's fact and what's fiction and really teach it? The reason I ask that question is one of my most memorable teachers and one of the most memorable experiences from my education started in fourth grade, where I had a teacher that actually put some media up at that time, on the overhead projector, right? And we went through an article, and I remember distinctly her discussing how you break down the article, how you understand the article, and actually how you start to think for yourself. And I remember even at a young age how she had recommended looking at everything that was written and look at everything that was on the news at night and always look at it with this keen eye. And she said, I have opinions and I have a different viewpoint than maybe some of your parents do. And it's challenging. And I remember I'm kind of putting words in her mouth from a fourth grade remembering perspective. But what I took away was, we all come with these sort of, kind of these conditions based on our home life, our environment, where we grew up, in the attitudes that we have, and we have to be able to set that aside and look at things objectively.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that being, and I actually had that teacher in fourth grade, and then again, got to experience a similar type approach in like early middle school. But I always remember how I had to look at everything from all sides. And I remember everybody saying, or the teacher saying, there is everybody has a perspective and an opinion. It's kind of like in an argument, there's three sides to every story, and it's important for you to look for that third side. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, how do you help teachers kind of make sure that they stay sort of like Switzerland when they're presenting this information and getting these kids to think about it from a different perspective?
No, it's a great question. There's a lot to unpack there. So let me
Sorry
start with.
about that. Yeah.
No, because it's a great question. And I can say when I was a middle school social studies teacher, I was a teacher during the 2000 presidential election. I'll date myself there. And you know what? I found it to be quite challenging to have to present to my students the election without betraying any bias that I might have had or
Yeah.
how I was voting or what I thought, right? And to simply deliver the facts. And I have to tell you, it's hard. It's really hard. And it made me, years later working for NLP, it made me really appreciate what a challenge producing quality unbiased journalism really is. And there are many, and I will say right now, there are many, many outlets and many, many practitioners who do that. Like there
Yeah.
is good news out there, right? And so for an educator, your question also raises the issue of why do we work with middle school, high school students predominantly? Why is that our target audience? And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, they're old enough to be deep critical thinkers. They're starting that skill, but they're young enough where they haven't really formulated their political opinions or their news habits. And so they're still teachable, right? It's a sweet spot. The other reason that we teach that age is because for the most of them, depending on their age, they will be first time voters in our next presidential election. That's kind of
Mhm.
the pipeline of,
Yeah.
the new citizens to participate in our great experiment here in this country. And so when we look at that, and we do that because, like I said, teaching younger people is easier than older people, and we have experience in trying to teach older people who have their political and news habits, pretty firmly ensconced. However, as we tell the educators, like I said, we provide the resources and the curriculum they need to teach news literacy in a variety of different ways, but we also provide the professional development. There is no such thing as a news literacy teacher. Nobody's going to school and getting their master's in education focused on teaching news literacy, right? It's not a subject. Maybe one day we'll have that, but this is a collection of English teachers, civics teachers, humanities, journalism. We even have science teachers now, unfortunately, who have to get into the disinformation combating mode. And so there is no such thing as a news literacy educator. However, in order to teach news literacy, you must practice news literacy. And so part of the professional development is actually having educators reflect on their own bias and on their own, what we call, news consumption habits or news diet. And so it's all part of the process. Um, and so, we, in our research and design team, they're fond of saying, oftentimes as an organization, we'll say we want people to be news literate. Um, but what our research and design team likes to say, and they're probably right, is that we want people to practice news literacy. It's kind of a journey. It's something that you always have to do, right? You always have
Sure.
to think. It's not like you're just news literate, right? And so it's really about creating that mindset in an educator to reflect on their own, on their own bias first before they teach this. And I want to take a minute here just to also say that you are correct in kind of laying the fundamental basics of news literacy is essentially applying critical thinking to news and information. That's sort of the skill set. But I do want to say that news literacy, as we have developed it and as we teach, train educators to teach it, is even broader than that. It's broader than just news and information. It is an understanding and a respect for the First Amendment, and that you understand why we have a free press, but also why we need a free press, understanding the role of that free press, being more civically engaged, like taking the knowledge and information that you're gaining and using it for the public good. We see it as much broader than just being able to discern fact from fiction or quality journalism from other journalism. But you are correct. That is sort of the basic skill. So apologies for that caveat there, but I did want to paint sort of a broader picture of what entails news literacy. Um, but yeah, it's a process for adults, and I often share, if I ever speak to educators, I share my own kind of journey. I came to NLP 6 years ago. I considered myself a news junkie. I joked that the only journalism credential I had that I shared during my interview was I was the editor of my middle school newspaper. So I was a journalist at heart. Um,
Nice.
but I was a news junkie my whole life, and so I thought I understood everything. I've learned so much about journalism, the practice of it, how difficult it is, where it falls short, that it's more of an art than a science, and that the true mark of quality journalism is the willingness to correct oneself when they make a mistake. But it's funny. 6 years into this role, I watch my preferred news on TV. I have a variety of sources, but I do have preferred ones, and I can now watch them and discern and say, "Oh, I wish they hadn't have done that." Or I think we've gone on for, this is an awful lot of analysis that's really just opinion. I was like, I'd
Yeah,
like us
yeah.
to move on. I still watch those sources, but to me, it's quite empowering to be able to say, okay, I'm going to take what I just saw and what I didn't think was quite right and compare it to another broadcast or a print publication. and sort of arrive at the truth that way and see what is sort of the unfiltered. And that's essentially what we're asking people to do. So I know it is possible, for adults to learn this, and I absolutely know that it's possible for students to do this as well.
Well, I mean, what you experience when you have those moments is a sense of empowerment, right? I think
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
that point
Yeah.
where you can actually say, "Okay, wait, we're crossing a line, or we're moving in a direction that maybe is not exactly um, truthful or accurate." It's now moving into kind of the lane of opinion, and I think that's one of the values that I certainly took away from the work that I've researched about what your organization does is helping those young people and adults get to that point to be able to say, okay, now I can make those determinations when it occurs. And when I was thinking about it as it relates to where a lot of us consume our information when we are the world being fast paced, we have so much thrown at us on a daily basis. I don't know what the actual statistics are now in terms of viewership on the nightly news, but it's got to be way, way down compared to what it was even 10, 15 years ago. But the social media, the misinformation, disinformation, how quickly that catches fire,
Mhm.
and how easily that creeps into all of our different news feeds, so to speak, right? Whether it's different social platforms we're paying attention to, somebody hearing something and then propagating it out to their network, which in 30 seconds or less, you can be, blasting that out to thousands of people. What are some of the challenges? I would imagine that's a real challenge for educating young people where their phone is in their hand 99% of the time these days,
Yep.
right? In comparison to when we grew up, and that was not as easily accessible. So how do you combat some of those challenges where misinformation can catch fire?
Yep, absolutely. So, yeah, when I mentioned that we live in the most complex information landscape in terms of the volume, um, there's two other aspects of it. The fractured nature of
Yeah.
where we're getting our news and information anymore. I mean, I've heard it a million times. It's almost a cliche now, but it is true that, 40, 50 years ago, I'm going to make these statistics up, but like 90% of Americans, right, were watching the three evening news
Yep.
broadcasts, right, with these trusted sources. And so everybody was seeing
And that
kind of
was
the
an
same
event. That's
thing,
what
right?
people
Yeah, it
did.
was an event,
It was
right?
an event around dinner. Yeah.
Even as a kid, I
Yep.
remember watching the local news
Same.
at 6 and then the national news at 6:30, right? And knowing that most people like in our neighborhood and in our city and then in the country we're watching the same thing. So the fractured nature of news and information now is another element. The third element is because of the internet and social media, particularly the speed at which this will come at people and spread. Right, and so those are three big challenges. But the interesting thing about this is, when you walk through I don't want to get too wonky on you here or
Sure,
put
sure.
people to sleep, right? But like one of the basic skills, one of the first skills that students learn when they're being taught news literacy is what we call zoning information, right? And so the very first thing you do when you see something, anything, anywhere, any kind of information is to decide what is it? Is it an ad? Is it an opinion piece? Is it just raw footage? Is it propaganda? Is it, news? And, you'd be surprised how many people, even adults, get that wrong. Like they don't see that, oh, this thing that looks like a news article is actually an advertisement or it is an opinion piece, right? You'll hear people attack a certain media outlet because of the news they report, not realizing that they're reading the opinion page, right? It's not the fact-based news of that outlet; it's the opinion page, right? And people conflate the two, and so that's the first thing that students really learn how to do is stop and think: what is it that I'm looking at, and what is its primary purpose? And then deal with it accordingly. Ascertain its veracity and its validity and its credibility. But that is kind of the first thing to do. And I mention that because that starts kind of a string of skill building that students learn when they become news literate or learn to practice news literacy, I should say. But it is appropriate for any type of news or information, whether you're watching TV, listening to the radio, if you're scrolling on social media, and by the way, I'll plug, we're fans of and associated with the Pew Research Centers here in DC. They just came out with a report that showed how many people are getting their news from the four biggest social media platforms now, right? That they don't, it's not the evening news, it's TikTok, Instagram, X, and Facebook. Right, and that's where they're getting their news now. But all of the skills that we teach and the mindsets and the tools that we give people to practice news literacy applies to anything, any kind of news or information on any platform. We're actually coming out with a new lesson on our digital platform all about algorithms and AI. For
I was going to
students to
ask you, yeah.
understand, yeah, and it's our best lesson. I can't wait for it to be released. It's kind of a new format for us and everything. We're pretty jazzed about it. But excuse me, but it's about, why do you see what you see on your phones? How, and then it spills over into AI, and how AI is, basically the algorithms we've been living with for a decade or more are a simple form of AI. It's machine learning. They learn about you, and then all of a sudden you start doing things. I just noticed the other day on my iPhone, every morning as I get up at the same time and start to work out, I listen to a certain podcast, and it now recommends on the screen, "Would you like me to start this podcast?" And I was like, it's kind of convenient, but it's also a little creepy
Yes, very.
that
Yeah.
it just knows you. But we're teaching students, and our learners that you can help. You need to understand why you're seeing what you're seeing, and the fact that you can actually, change what you see. I got to be honest with you. I don't use Twitter or X that much anymore for professional reasons, but I do like to, see what's being posted. I actually changed my algorithm by liking nothing but historical videos and dog and cat videos, right? And so 90% of my feed now is just that. And so going on to X is actually a therapeutic exercise for me, because I can just learn about history or watch a cute dog or a cat, right? And that people can actually, manipulate what they're seeing. And if you click on a conspiracy theory, pretty soon, and you're just interested in that conspiracy theory, you're going to start seeing a whole
Yeah.
bunch of conspiracy theories, right? Videos about that conspiracy theory. So all of a sudden, people are starting to think it might be true, just because of all this. And so just applying news literacy skills as we teach them, and being aware of what's happening around you and why you're seeing what you're seeing, really helps students navigate news and information regardless of where they're getting it. But as you are correct, mostly on their phone, for
Well, and
sure.
and it's so critical that they understand how a simple heart or like or forward, how impactful that is to that algorithm, and that algorithm then begins to feed, sort of, oh, you've
Yep.
got, like you said, you've got interest in X, Y, and Z, and now it's going to, present you with more opportunities like that. But you really see it when it does come down to, and especially we're in the election cycle now, right? You're starting to see more and more of that ramp up on social media as adults, when we see that from our friends and our family and our neighbors, et cetera. And all of a sudden, next thing you know, it's that one simple like that you think you're doing just to acknowledge that a person posted it. But now you're actually telling something a little bit about yourself to the robots that are out there, that are like, oh, well, maybe you're open to that perspective, or you're maybe that you're supportive of that. And it is kind of critical that, especially as we move into that piece, I think I'm going to share my opinion. You tell me if I'm right, but to be more discerning, like you are, right? At the end of the day, to be very cautious about what you are supporting, what you're promoting, and ultimately what you're liking and sharing out there, because that's going to have an impact over the course of these next couple of months as the political challenges become
Hmm.
more and more played out on social media and in the
Absolutely.
news.
Absolutely. And, something that users, I always refer to students, because that's, who we're targeting in the best way possible. It's sort of a loaded term. The students that we're serving, that's the population we're serving, but this applies to anyone on social media. You have to understand, every time you click on something, whether it's a like or a shop now button, you are telling the algorithms who you are. You are creating your own profile, and they're going to curate your experience online on whatever app you're on to match those interests. And, to some people that'd be like, great, I want to see more like me. I want to see more cat videos and puppy videos. That's fine. But to others, like I said, when you stumble upon, less savory, we'll say opinion makers, and folks that are not really spouting the truth, it becomes kind of dangerous because that then becomes your internet existence,
Yeah.
right? And it's all you see and it's all you hear, and it becomes harder and harder to apply some of the skills that we're talking about. But we feel that when students are inoculated against this, where their first stop is to first step is to stop and think about what they're looking at first before they share it or before they comment, can go a long, long way to not only helping the student or the individual, keep a clean news and information diet, but also to stop spreading disinformation itself, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
don't share this,
Yep.
don't let people know,
Be
even
part
if
of
you
the
think it's
cure.
funny, right? Yeah, be part of the cure, right? Don't spread it. The only way it reaches you, the only way disinformation spreads is by people sharing it. So, stop doing it,
Well,
basically.
I don't know if you know Carol Costello through Lorenza or not,
Mhm.
but Carol Costello was on, obviously CNN and now teaches at the university level. And she said, I feel like I have an obligation to educate the journalists of the future because they have grown up with devices in their hand. They've consumed information through very skewed means in a lot of
Mhm.
respects. It used to be just family opinion, right? You grew up in a Republican family, you were a Republican when you were a young adult, or vice versa. And now the challenges are vastly different. And educating those future journalists is become a passion of hers and such an important duty, right? Because it is so critical. And I remember her and I talking offline. She was on my podcast as well, but we were talking about the responsibility and getting into that business for the right reason, right? Some of them see it as a foray into I'm a superstar because some news outlets really focus more on the star credential more so than hard hitting news, right? Informing the public. So making sure you're getting into that role for the right reasons. It kind of made me think about for NLP because your nonpartisan approach to how and what you do to educate young people and the adults that I think I want to talk about resources that you have on the website because there's a plethora of it for anybody that's listening to this podcast. But how do you guys use what guardrails do you use to ensure that you can stay focused on the nonpartisan approach to delivering what you do to your audience, right? Your target audience, which is young people.
Yep, well, it's a great question. I appreciate it. There's a couple things I'll say on the front end. One, we are rigorously nonpartisan for a couple of reasons. First, this allows us to work in red states, blue states, purple states. We can have a separate conversation. I don't really like those labels,
Right.
but
Yep.
we have partnerships in Florida and Alabama and Tennessee and Texas, just like we have partnerships in California and Connecticut and Illinois, right? Because we
Yeah.
walk that line. The second reason we're rigorously nonpartisan is because being news literate isn't a partisan issue.
That's right.
Disinformation affects everyone negatively, right? It's regardless, it doesn't really care what your political persuasion is. Purveyors of disinformation target progressives and conservatives, the well informed and the not so well informed. It affects everyone. This kind of goes back to the comment I made at the beginning of what's so rewarding about working at NLP. This helps everyone. This is something we all need. It doesn't matter if you're rich, you're poor, you're black, you're white. Nothing. And
Yep.
certainly not if you're liberal or conservative, right? Progressive or conservative. And so, the fact that by its nature this is a nonpartisan issue, and by our strategic imperative we need to be nonpartisan. We are. So, we take a couple steps to do this. First, our board is bipartisan in structure. We've got prominent conservatives, former members of the Bush administration, members of the Clinton administration, Obama administration. We've got educators, we've got technology specialists, and so there is no political sway one way or the other on our board. They are all united, as different as they may be in their political opinions. They are all united in this cause, by this cause, and the solution that we offer. Or I should say, the contribution we make to the
Yeah.
solution to this problem, right? And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, our staff, we actually, when you join NLP staff, you have to abide by a certain policy that largely mimics those of journalists. Our public political activity is curtailed. Our social media activity is curtailed in terms of what we can and cannot say. That's part of the reason I just now get dog and cat videos on X, just because it's easier that way, right? And
Share
it's
those
it.
when you get a chance.
I will.
I'll be happily
I'll
receive
share
them.
them. I share them every day. I feed that algorithm. But I will also say that it's a sacrifice that our staff
Sure.
is willing to make, because every single person who comes to work for NLP is very civically minded and very civically active, whether they're conservative or progressive. And so to not be able to participate in some aspects of our public civic life is a sacrifice we're all willing to make. But the most important thing that we do is the internal checks and balances and review process we have. We do it internally and externally with folks to scrub every resource that we create, even to the limit of, we'll check to see if the title of a resource next to the thumbnail. I'll just give you an example. It was something about disinformation and had a rather unflattering thumbnail of Donald Trump next to it. Actually, that was just a clip from a video. It had nothing to do. It was how the system put it together. But we flagged it and we caught it, because basically what it looked like was we were saying this person here is dishonest always, and taking a stand on it. And we will fix it, right? And we'll
Yeah.
flag these before anything goes public. And like I said, the proof for us is, in the fact that we work with districts all over the country, and this simply isn't an issue. People do see us as an unbiased, really middle of the road, nonpartisan organization. And we've been put to the test. Some people have openly said, we're going to vet your materials to see if you're as nonpartisan as you are. And they're now current partners with us. And
That's
so we're,
great.
we're incredibly proud of it, because it comes at some personal cost to our staff, but also at, great effort by the organization to do it, but it's important that we do it.
I love that you guys go to that level of pain in order to make sure that what you're delivering is is exactly what you say you're delivering, right? At the end of the day, I think that's amazing. And when you use the word sacrifice, I don't want our audience to lose sight of that. I think that's a tremendous sacrifice that you're asking of your team in order to deliver the best possible product. And that's truth. That's fact. And that is important. And there's a need for that today in this world, especially now in the environment that we have. And I think there's just I just have a tremendous respect for what you're doing, which leads me to my next question for my audience who is thinking about how they approach what it is we're talking about today. What questions should they be asking about how they consume their news or where they consume it? What do you think they
Yep.
should be thinking about as they look at their news literacy?
Sure thing. And it's a smart question to ask, and I'm glad we have the opportunity to help educate people just a bit. So there are several things folks can do. The first is what I mentioned earlier. One of our primary lessons for students is to stop and think, what is this? I'm not even going to call it news necessarily. What is this piece of information trying to do? What is it, and what is it trying to do? One of the sure tells about something is, does it elicit an emotional response? If it does, that's a flag for anyone to think like, well, what is this? If I we joke around the office. I don't actually think this is in one of our lessons, but it might as well be. Like, if you're reading something, online or print or whatever, that says, you won't believe what La da 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 da. It's like you should probably like approach with skepticism, right? With
Believe
some
what they're
critical
telling you.
thinking. Exactly. It's like you won't believe what this person said, or you won't believe what happened. It's clickbait is the term,
Yeah.
right? It's
Total
clickbait to get
clickbait.
onto
Yeah.
it, and so you're gonna want to be aware of your the purpose of the information that's being given to you, but also then your own reaction to it. And
Yeah.
we had a phrase on one of our public campaigns a while back. It's like, think before you share. And that's actually one of the best things you can do to stop the spread of disinformation, is to think before you share. Like I mentioned, disinformation becomes viral because people share it, right? And so just stop and think that, like, this is not true, right? And we actually, not to plug us too much, but we actually have a website called rumorguard.org where folks can go in and see some of the most prevalent viral rumors that they probably have seen online, and we break it down for them to tell them why we know this isn't true, right? And it's not just our word; it's the work of other fact checkers that we aggregate for folks. But we can tell you what isn't true. But if people want to spend a little bit more time with us, we explain to folks how they can figure out if it was true. They can actually go through the process. We don't hide anything. It's like we won't just spit out the answer like not true. We'll give the analysis, but then we'll also give folks the resources to do that analysis on their own. But one of the best parts of that website is you can take one of these viral rumors that we have debunked, and you can immediately share it on any social media platform you want. So if you put out the debunked rumor, it affects the algorithm, so that when folks start clicking on that rumor, they'll very likely see the debunk of the rumor too, right? So in this process, not only does RumorGuard allow people to learn what is the truth, but they could also learn how to discern it themselves. But it actually gives them something tangible they can do to push back against disinformation, right?
I love that.
Uh,
I love that.
yeah, right.
Well,
Right now, folks, I think are running, for the hills, being like, "Oh, there's nothing we can do about this," but there actually is.
there
Beyond
is. Yeah.
educating yourself, you can actually be what we call, an upstander for fact, and just say like, "No, this is not true."
Well, I mean, you tie right back into actually my next question was, the website, if you spend any time on it, has a tremendous amount of resources. You don't just have to be a student in, middle school or high school in order to benefit from the work that you're doing. In fact, you even have a podcast called "Is That Fact or Fiction?" I love that you guys have so many resources. Are there a few that you'd like to, aside from the one you just shared, any others that you might like to point out to our audience that are worth checking out?
Sure. So that is, RumorGuard by far is the most, I think, interactive and real time, resource that folks can access and use, and make use of, I should say. We also have a weekly newsletter. It's called Get Smart About News, and it's a version of our weekly newsletter for educators, called The Sift. And we publish The Sift every week during the school year. And what that does is it gives educators real time prompts and lessons they click on, and they can teach news literacy for 10, 15, 20 minutes in their class that day and use it, all with, uh, super relevant issues that their kids have probably seen online or heard on the news, right? And to make news literacy really, really relevant for their daily lives, we take that issue the very next day, and produce the same information, but not for educators, right? For the broader public,
Oh, that's
so that people
awesome.
can learn these things. And so signing up for that, and those are our two principal resources that are rather live and ongoing, that are constantly updated for people.
Those are tremendous. I encourage our audience to be sure to check those out and get involved with that. I could talk to you all day and I would love to at some juncture just continue this conversation, maybe in a follow-up episode or maybe even just offline. There's so many questions that I have, but I want to be respectful of your time. And in my podcast, I ask these ripple connection questions, which give my audience just a little bit more insight as to my guest and just a little bit more perspective. And I want to do this one just a little bit differently because I actually asked a question of Matt Arnold with your team. a Ripple question that I think I threw him for a loop initially. Like, why are you asking me the question? I'm not on the interview, but I asked him what makes you show up every single day to do this work, and I thought you didn't appreciate his answer, which is I show up with the confidence that I, in my small way, am making a difference for our democratic republic. That while the deluge of mis and disinformation cannot be quelled, it can at least be managed. People just need to know how, and that starts by educating our kids to be skeptical consumers of media. In a word that is called hope. And I love that, and so I want to ask you the same question. So, what makes Chuck show up every single day to do this work?
Yep. Well, first of all, Matt, is inaccurate in, the contribution that he makes to the organization, as he says in his own small way. Um, and, I'd echo a lot of what he says. What gets me up in the morning and brings me to work, because, running a nonprofit, and certainly in this field, education in general, but this specific issue, it's not easy, Steve.
No.
On some days, there are a lot of challenges, as there are with many folks trying to do good work in the world.
And
But I think
yet you don't look like you're wearing the stress at all. Like I need to know whatever you're doing because I need to like emulate that. So just so you
it's the
know.
filter on my camera, Steve. That's all. It's the filter on my camera. But what I would say is it's largely echoing Matt, but in my own words, it is the fact that I can come to work every day. I work with brilliant people who care about the same thing I do. We all have different interests and we care about other things, but we all care about this thing. And that we have a real shot. That's actually putting it too mildly. We will make a critical difference in this work.
Yeah.
And, it's taken us 16 years to get here, but we're going to do it. Because we have to, and we're already starting to see the effects of what we do. And I think success breeds success, and all those other cliches. While we do sometimes take a step back, and as any organization would with its work, we're constantly moving forward. We're getting better at what we do. We get bigger at what we do, and we're seeing people really come along with this work, and school districts join us in droves, and people really begin to understand this issue. Not so much that it's a problem, because people know that this is a problem, that there's all this disinformation out there, but that there is something we can do about it. And that is truly meaningful, to have a job that supports your own life, your own lifestyle, but to know that you are making a real difference for people that, quite frankly, you will never meet, but we all share the same community, and so what we're doing for other people, will ultimately affect me too. So
Yep.
it's very gratifying.
Well, my approach to when I talk about the ripple is you create a lot of positive ripples out there, but they often ripple back to you, right? In ways you
Right.
don't expect. So you may not meet them all, but you are making a difference out there in the world. And that's huge. What did the 7-year-old Chuck want to be when he grew up?
Oh my God, that's a great question. Um, you know what? It's really funny because I wanted to be a millionaire scientist astronaut. That this was my thing. I was, as kids were, I was kind of obsessed with money, but I wanted to be an astronaut. They were my heroes. I think I said this in a bio video I did for NLP when I became CEO. One of my and my generation's defining moments in the news was the Challenger explosion,
Yeah,
and watching it at school, with a teacher on board,
me
and
too. Yeah.
yeah, and they were always my heroes. But then I learned that it's really hard to become a millionaire, actually, and also it's even harder to become an astronaut. And I just did not do math and science; those were not my things. And so, getting into education, and this kind of civic engagement work, became my true calling. But yeah, my 7-year-old me might be disappointed with with my career right now, to be honest.
I don't know. I think he might be proud of you for sure. How do you like to spend your free time?
So I love being outdoors, and I think that can take myriad forms. I really like cooking. I got into cooking. Both my parents cook a lot, and just to me, people ask, why do you like cooking or baking so much? And honestly, I could say, oh, it's making people happy and doing, but no, it's actually for me what it is. It's just the act of creation of like doing something and saying like, look, I made that. I find incredibly gratifying. And I just recently, my husband and I just got a dog for the first time, and he's 8 months old, and that kind of changed our lives a little bit more than I thought. And that's taking up a lot of my time right now. So, yeah.
And what's your dog's name?
His name is Calvin.
Kelvin. All right, that's
Calvin.
awesome.
Yeah.
So who has played or had a huge impact in helping you become who you are today?
Hmm. Um, I could go through the standard litany of my parents, things like that, which is absolutely true. But honestly, I would say the folks who have helped me become who I am are teachers. I can name my teachers throughout elementary, middle, and high school. I've gotten several college professors. I remember the interactions I had with them, sometimes one on one, where I made a fool of myself, but just the lessons that I learned, and even into law school and grad school, I have professors that profoundly changed the way I look at the world, but more importantly, my place in it and my responsibility in it. And I think about some of the conversations and lessons I learned from those teachers, and I'm so grateful because I think how insufferable I might be had I not met them, and experienced the lessons that they had to teach me. Nothing's more offensive to me than that stupid quote of those who can do and those who can't teach. Um, it's
Yeah.
just so offensive to me and
Yep.
so not
And
true because
not at all true.
the act of teaching is in fact doing. So it is something you do, and I think teachers don't get enough respect, which is
Agreed.
which is heartbreaking to me because every single one of us can probably say what I just said
Yeah.
about the teachers who changed our lives. And so why they are not venerated members of our society, I'll never know.
And the highest
But yeah,
paid. They should be.
and the highest paid, yeah, at least it's better paid, at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was truly I've been fortunate. The education that I've had in my life, and more specifically, the individuals who are part of it, without
I
a doubt.
love that. Great answer. What book changed your life?
Um, wow. So when I was growing up, I did not like to read at all, and which would prove problematic when I got to law school. But when I was about college age, I read a book called "The Pillars of the Earth" by David
Ooh.
Follett. And it's a fiction book. It's a historical fiction, and he's written several sequels and a prequel and stuff to it. It's a great series. But it was the first book that I read that I actually elicited verbal reactions from me while I was reading it. Like I was sitting all by myself, but like something would happen, I'd be like, I'd have this response. And to me, it really just changed the way I looked at reading and writing. This kind of ties into the news as well, just the idea of storytelling and the power of storytelling. And now I'm a voracious reader. I'll read anything I can get my hands on, fiction, nonfiction, whatever. And I so admire people who can either communicate their ideas through the written word, but more importantly, can create entire worlds on their own through the written word. And I'm a little sad that the first 18, 19 years of my life I didn't appreciate that. But it was that book. No self-help book or anything. I mean, I've read many that I love, and but in terms of what's kind of um, helped me be who I am and how I look at the world and the gifts that other people have, it was that book, for
That's
sure.
fantastic. I love that. I will have to check that book out for sure. Last two questions. What does the ripple effect mean to you?
Um, that's great. Right off the top of my head, I would say um, I think there's a lot of different ways, pay it forward. There's a lot of different ways to express. I think
Sure.
the idea of the ripple effect. But I do think, to me, when I think of it, is the singularity, the single person, the single stone in the water. Like the impact that that person can have, for good or ill, um, I think will extend far beyond what we may ever know as an individual. And you got to keep that in mind, that you help people you may never meet in ways that you never thought, but the opposite can be true as well. And so you've just got to think through that as you're making decisions in life.
Excellent answer. And what positive ripples can I be looking to create for you?
I appreciate the time. For us, besides, as a nonprofit, raising money is one of the things, but one of our other currencies is just public awareness and support. And so, spreading the word, letting people know that we exist. If they want to support us, that's great. If they want to just use our resources, that's great too. But really just raising awareness that there is something people can do about this. This is not as hopeless as it may sound on the news. And so we appreciate any advocates on our behalf that can spread that message.
Absolutely. We're going to be sharing this far and wide because like I said at the very onset of our conversation, it's the work that you're doing is super critical and important. And I sort of plead with my audience to support you in any way they possibly can. And along that lines, what's the best way for them to, share the website and any other ways that you might like them to follow you or the organization?
I mean, being a virtual organization, we try to make it as easy as possible for folks. So everything about us, everything that we offer for people, any way that someone can support us, it's all there. Newslit.org, on our website. They can even reach out to various staff if they have ways that they think that they want to help. It's all listed there. We're quite transparent, and we put it in one place for folks because we know that the internet is complicated enough. So yeah.
That's perfect. Well, and I'm going to have to tell Lorenza how much I enjoyed this conversation, and I'm so grateful that she connected us. And I look forward to continuing to get to know you and find ways to create even bigger, more positive ripples for you in any way that I can. But I just want to say thank you for the time. Thank you for your openness and your willingness to approach this topic and to have that conversation. The work that you're doing is important, and I think more people need to understand what it is that you're helping young people appreciate about being very intentional about learning, like you said, their news literacy. But I also think it's really important for all of us that are hearing this today and are going to see this on YouTube and hear it on the various podcast platforms to really utilize this as a wake up call to really understand where your perspective is today and where you can potentially better yourself. And so the work that you're doing, I think, is phenomenal. So thank you so much for what you do. I think you're creating so many positive ripples out there in the world, and it's going to be so needed as we continue to move forward with all the craziness that we face as a society. So thanks for the work that you and your team do.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for the opportunity. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, Chuck, and thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And for our audience, we'll be back with another episode of The Ripple Effect very soon. But, Chuck, until then, ripple on.